sometimes the most perfect of characters can also be the most boring. And today we're going to talk about how to make your characters more interesting. Now, I had a personal investor in this. No, that's not right. But anyway, you know what I mean. This actually applied to me personally, is what I should have said. I recently decided to start a new book about Apollo, the ancient god of, he's the god of the god of music, and all sorts of other things. And my longtime readers know that I have a series called The Gods Made Me Do It. And in each book, they're all standalone books in my series. I take different gods and I find mates for them. Because, of course, ancient gods who are not allowed to interfere in mortal affairs, can get bored very quickly. So the fates decided to give them mates so that the threads in the tapestry of life could be extended by more immortal beings. A simple enough premise. And I have written about the normal ones. I have given Zeus a mate. I have given Hades a mate. I have given Poseidon a mate. I have given Loki a mate. I have given Thor a mate. I have given all these different gods like Hephaestus and Seth, the god of the Egyptian god of storms. I have given them all mates. And what has fascinated me about these different gods is that they've all had a flaw. When I've gone back and looked at their mythology, they've all had something that made them interesting, which gave me the premise of my story. But for the longest time, my readers wanted me to write about Apollo. And I had read over everything that I could find that, is on the internet. Thank goodness for the internet. But I could not find something that made him interesting. The only thing that came across in a very broad overview of what is written about him is that he had been in love numerous times, and it always seemed to work badly. And I'd thought, okay, well, I can take that as a thread, because if I give him a fated mate, and if those of you know what the law of fated mates are, it is that the fates have determined that two people or more are perfect for each other. But if you have a god who is perfect in every way, but doesn't believe in love because of the number of heartbreaks he's had over the millenniums, then what happens when you put them with somebody like a wolf shifter, for example, who's all mine and claws and teeth? It was an interesting premise, but it wasn't enough to carry the story. And so I sort of reached out to my readers and I was like, okay, I'm going to write about Apollo, but he has to do something. He has to have something that makes him interesting. And I am really blessed with my reader base. My readers are amazing. They will, they came up with all sorts of ideas for hobbies and things like that he could do. But I still think I wanted more. I wanted to see him obviously in a human element. There's no point in him sitting up on Olympus when I want him to meet a wolf shifter in somewhere like New York. So I had to make him interesting. And this proved a lot harder than I had originally thought of. Now, when you come to design your character, or you're thinking about your character, when you're starting your story, you have likely got down the basics, such as, their age, their physical description, what do they do for a living, where do they live? And, maybe if you're like me and you write paranormal, then there'll be a species type and things like that. And then you'll also want to give some thought to their personality. So you might have a character sheet written out and maybe, maybe they're rather introverted, or maybe they're overly extroverted. Maybe they just have a small group of friends that they're very close to, or maybe they're very involved with their family. There are different things, and like, how do they manifest themselves? Do they always giggle when they see something horrible happen, or do they crack jokes in an inopportune time? Are they a useless drunk? All different things. Their personality is an important part of what makes them relatable to your readers. So it's always a good idea to have a handle on that. You're also looking at things like backstory. Now, I am always very cautious about the concept of a character's backstory. With a backstory, I have seen some authors get so weighed down in it because they've put so much thought into it that it actually lends too heavily on the storyline. And that's not always appropriate. Backstory is a bit like world building. It's the sort of thing you thread in through your story as it's appropriate, rather than info dumping on a poor reader and probably another unsuspecting character, because that's usually conveyed in dialogue. I think sometimes that can weigh things down, particularly if it's not relevant. So, but it is probably always a good idea to have an indication of what that character's backstory is. They don't just appear fully formed out of the ether. And a lot of what a person might have gone through before would help determine their actions in the plot going forward. But it's sometimes that's the sort of notes and what have you that is best kept off the page rather than on when you're writing. But it is always handy. And I know a lot of authors who put a lot of thought into their character's backstory. But does that make them interesting? Their relationship with others is another important thing. And this is sometimes where I struggle with gods, because even if we have gods walking among us, our ancient gods walking among us, which is the premise in my stories, then they're still probably not going to be the life and soul of the party, or somebody who has a huge group of friends and things like that. Particularly in my world, I'm constrained by the fact that in the God series, paranormals aren't known about. So, the wolf shifters and the vampires and the fae and the mages and everybody else that live in our world at the moment, that humans are not aware of their existence. So that would make it more difficult in the case of an ancient god, for example, that they are probably more likely to have a very small select group of friends, if they're going to have any at all, or they're more inclined to just pretty much just go about their business, rather aloof and not having anything to do with anybody. But those relationships with others is another important dynamic in your character, and helps to give the reader some expectation of how they're going to respond to various plot points throughout the story. And I think one of the other things that is also really important before you even start writing your book is finding out what is your character's why. I know it sounds a bit arty-farty, but it is actually a thing. If you have an idea of the reason why your character is the way they are, then that helps to work out how they're going to respond to those same plot points throughout the story. If it's a bit awkward to speak about this generally, because I do write romances. So my whys, like, for example, I've started another book recently as well. I know I started 3 books this last week because I've got 2 books to be finished in December. And at time of recording, it's the 27th of September. So it's like, I gotta write. But I had a why, like it was like I had a particular character in one of my books, and I was thinking to myself, well, like I talk about the fact that he doesn't like to be noticed, and he prefers to be unobtrusive, and he buries himself in research, and he doesn't have a very large social circle, and I need to know why. And so does the reader. The reader wants to know why. If you drop something like that in a page, then the reader wants to know why as well. So that's something that's going to have to be conveyed through the plot. But the thing is, above all, is your characters need to be interesting. And this brings me back to Apollo. When you have, I read a newsletter the other day. I can't think who it was from. I think it was from another YouTuber that has a writing channel, and they were talking about characters and flaws and things like that, and making them interesting. And they were talking about when you have a character that is basically perfect, that they're all powerful and they can fix everything because they've got magic. And of course, a god falls under that category as well. Apollo would be able to fix most things with a wave of his godly hand as he's sauntering along through life, not being affected by anyone or anything. But it doesn't make him interesting. In fact, it actually becomes a barrier to actually giving him any form of humanity. And so to make him interesting, I need to see him on the page, out and about, and how he interacts with different people. And eventually I settled on the idea of him helping at a youth center as a music teacher, and allowing his power as a muse, the god of muse, to be able to stimulate young people who are living in difficult situations. Does that make him interesting, or does that make him cliched? I guess I'll know more when I've finished writing. At the moment, I've only done about 4 chapters in this one, so I will learn as I go ahead. But having something interesting, it is very common now for authors to give their characters flaws, and that is a really good idea. They need to have something wrong with them. And this was where I had an issue with the god, because, of course, why would an ancient god have anything wrong with them? However, that did make things a lot easier. See, I had more luck writing stories like Hades, for example. And I mean, his biggest flaw was Persephone. And then you have things like Seth, the god of the storms, who was particularly angry at Ra and carried a whole lot of anger around with him. And I am probably better as an author taking these characters who are really angsty and rather horrible and turning them into wonderful partners for their mates. And this is where I have a problem with Apollo, because Apollo is already perfect. He is already gorgeous. He is already wonderful. He just doesn't believe in love anymore because love is an issue. But that isn't so much a character flaw as perhaps more of his why. So yeah, I'm still working on Apollo, but what sort of suggestions do you have? How do you make your characters interesting? We all know that it is characters that actually provide the depth and color in a story. So how do you make yours interesting? What little flaws do you have for your characters? Are they simple things like leaving damp towels on the floor? Are they perhaps where incidences where, they're socially awkward or something like that? Or are they people who are really good with other people, but actually to the point where they don't like being alone? What is it you think would make a character interesting in your eyes? I would be really interested to hear what you've got to say in the comments below. And if you have any hints about Apollo, then please let me know. But anyway, this is what I feel about different characters. I personally, as you know, because I'm a pantser, I learn about my characters as I'm writing the story. I honestly don't put a lot of thought into my characters very much until I start writing because I'm a pantser. But I had to give some thought to Apollo because I needed, as an author, I needed to find that hook. I needed to find that something interesting that snagged my attention so that I could write about them. And sometimes when it comes to perfect beings, that's not always possible. They are not likely to leave their wet towels on the floor. And if they were, they'd probably just flick them away with a wave of their godly hand as well. So, yeah, I'll keep you updated and I'll let you know how I get on. But I'd also be really interested in your comments about your characters below. Or if you're not a writer, but you read a lot, what type of characters interest you? What type of characters do you keep going back for more? What is it about them that intrigues you and that you really enjoy? I think that would be really helpful for the authors among us as well to know that sort of thing. But there we go. What did you think? I post long form contents on Mondays and Thursdays. I would truly appreciate it if you'd leave a like, a subscribe, or better yet, a comment, because I do respond to every comment. And and YouTube does a really good job of appreciating interaction. So, and that is my goal here, to try and get some interaction. So we talk about these things and provide perhaps a bit of help for the other authors among us. But in the meantime, I do hope you've had fun. I do hope I've been able to help you in a small amount of way. I do also hope that you have a wonderful day and that you're enjoying your writing. And in the meantime, until next time, we'll see you then. Bye.